Good morning everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Today's video is mostly bananas. So we were really lucky to score some cheap bananas from town. So if you haven't been around before, we shop every 6 weeks and we shop 4 hours away every 6 weeks. So at the moment we're in week 5 of our 6-week shopping trip, so we don't have a lot of fresh fruit and veg left to use. We don't generally buy too much in between our shopping trips because part and parcel of being able to save money is by restricting ourselves to those 6 weekly grocery shops. So we have plenty of frozen fruits, canned fruits and all that sort of thing, but we don't go out of our way to buy anything more because I find that if you say you only shop monthly but you go every week for fresh produce, it's going to add up really quickly. So we don't do that. So when something does come up though, I will take an opportunity. So I was surfing Facebook or something, and Foodworks, which is one of our local little food stores in Millmerran, had boxes of bananas for $15, well ripened bananas. So they worked out about $1 a kilo, which isn't bad for bananas, especially at this time of the year. So I sent Darryl in and he managed to get 2 boxes of those bananas, which was wonderful because we didn't have any fresh fruit at the moment other than some apples from the hamper. So went in and got the bananas. Now, they were very ripe, so we had to do a bunch of different things. So I don't think I've shown any footage of it, but we froze a whole lot. So Apollo sliced a whole lot into coins and froze them in layers on baking sheets, and then others we cut into thirds and froze those. We will use them for smoothies, but they can also be used for baking with as well, because you can just use frozen banana pureed up as baking. If it discolors, it doesn't really matter because you're baking with it, so it's fairly irrelevant. So we have a lot of frozen banana in the freezer as well at the moment, which is fantastic because buying bananas frozen, like you can buy bags of bananas frozen at Costco, but it ends up being, I think it's like $6 a kilo for the bananas, so it's really expensive compared to doing it this way. Worth the effort. But at the same time, a lot of bananas and they go off pretty quick. Now, when we have heaps of bananas like that, the kids can have 2 a day. I try and limit them to 2 a day because bananas can cause tummy issues if you have them too much. So they have 2 a day is enough. And then I do some baking with them. So today's video, I'm showing you what we did. We did the banana bread, but we also did the banana bread in jars. So it was something new. I have made date and nut loaf roll in jars before, and it worked really well. And I had seen people do banana bread as well, so we decided to do that. I also today made lemon ginger cordial, so I've brought you along for that as well. Once again, I'm doing the voiceover for these like a week after this was all done, so you'll have to excuse my past and present tense timing sometimes gets a little bit mixed up, but enjoy seeing this. And we were pretty pleasantly surprised by the banana bread and the cake, and at the end I will show you cutting one out of the jar as well. So come along, see what we got done, and I will see you at the end. Alrighty, so as I said, $15 a box, really ripe bananas had to be done. So one of the first things I did was cooked up a couple of large loaves of banana bread. So each loaf is like a double batch of my standard type recipe, which uses around about 500 grams of bananas. So that's a nice amount to be using. I use it in the Mackey's jumbo bread tins because it's the size of this, like this banana bread is a significant size of batter, and the jumbo bread tins are a 900 gram bread loaf tin thing. So that's what I was using. So I regularly mix chocolate chips through the loaves as well, but we don't have any at the moment, and plain banana bread is good too. Sometimes I add nuts or coconut or something like that, but the kids really prefer it just plain, and I was making 2 big loaves of it, so I thought I'd just leave it plain, and that would be preferable to them. My banana bread recipe, I'll put it in the comments. It's very simple, and I use the Thermomix to make it just because it's nice and easy. Uses a bit of olive oil, no dairy in it, and it works really well. So I mixed up 2 of the loaves and got them going. Now I'd also proofed dough for sandwich bread. I'm still working on sandwich bread. I still haven't quite found one I like. A lot of them are enriched. I don't really like enriched bread. I'm still working on it anyway, but I'd proofed this one, so I shaped it to put into the bread tin for its second proof while I was getting everything else done. I have these quite small cast iron bread loaf tins, which are really are really lovely for this sort of a size loaf. It's a small loaf, but I think that's kind of a good thing because it means I get to trial them without having excess amounts, though I don't know why I worry about it, because the kids will eat any bread I make pretty much. They don't really, all the fussiness I have about my bread, they definitely do not have. So, you know, so I shaped it for the loaf tin and put it aside to do its second rise. I have all the bananas and I don't have much freezer space, so we froze a whole bunch of them, as I said, cut them into coins, cut them into thirds, and froze as much as I could. But I had decided to make some of the cakes in a jar. Now, I've made the date and nut loaf in a jar before. There's a video showing that, and it worked really well, and it was lovely, and the kids really enjoyed it. And within those groups, they talk about making banana bread and self-sourcing puddings and stuff too. I really want to try the self-sourcing pudding, especially if I could do individual size, because that would be really awesome. Like, awesome in a bad way, probably. But they do make banana bread. So they talk about the different ways that they make it and all the rest of it. I decided to go with my standard banana bread recipe because a lot of people say that they just use their own banana bread recipes, and when I looked at the recipes that other people were using, they were very similar. So I did my own recipe, and then everything else, everybody was saying about 450 grams of batter into the 31 size jars. So that's what I did. Now, I mixed up multiple batches of the batter so that I could fill multiple jars, because I want to do a whole can of load because it's got to cook for 90 minutes. I put the jars to the 450 gram mark. It looked a little full to me, but I went back, everyone was talking about 450 gram worked perfectly. So I kept with it and put 450 grams in each of the jars. You want to use a funnel so that your batter is falling straight into the middle of the jars. You're not getting any batter on the sides. I sprayed very lightly the inside of the jar with a little bit of oil as well to help with sliding the cake out, though that doesn't always help. Some people put a little circle of baking paper on the bottom of the jar as well, and things like that. I didn't go to that much effort, but I did spray the inside of the jars slightly, used a funnel so that we weren't getting batter all up the side of the jars as well. Filled it to the 450 grams. As I said, it didn't look quite right to me, but I was following instructions and decided to give it a go. Did all the usual. So you clean the rims as usual with white vinegar, you put the rubbers on, the lids on. Now, they need to cook at a rolling boil for 90 minutes, and they have to be submerged. These jars have a lot of negative space because of they're only half full, so there's a lot of air in there, and they will float or fall over or whatever in the pot if there's nothing holding them. So once I put them in the pot, and as I said, I made enough to fill the pot because I'm going to run it for a serious amount of time. I want to make the most of it. And then I put a lid with a broken handle on top, so it had no handle on it, it was just a flat lid. You could use a dinner plate, you could use a canning rack, anything like that to put on top, something nice and wide and even to hold the jars down. And then you're going to need to weigh it down. So you could use a nice clean rock from your garden, you could use a jar full of water, you could use a bowl full of water. There's various different choices. I have these fermenting weights out of my crock that I make sauerkraut in, so I just used that because that was really nice and convenient and worked really well. So you put the lid on there, the weight on there. Now you want to bring the canner up to a full rolling boil, like your water bath canning, which is basically what you're doing. You can't actually, as much as these are a Fowler's Vicola style steamed pudding, boiled pudding, you can't actually process them in the Fowler's Vicola method because they have to be at a rolling boil, and Fowler's Vicola doesn't go there. The way they process is under boiling. It's at 92, 95, something like that degrees. So that's not the case with this. It has to be at a full rolling boil, and it has to go for 90 minutes. So you need to supervise the pot a bit because they're a tall jar, so you can only have a certain amount of water in there, otherwise the water's going to come out. And if the water is dropping, then you can add more water. So you need to make sure that you use boiling water out of a kettle, so you're not changing the rolling boil of the pot, but you can top it up with boiling water as needed. If you put the lid on the pot, like whatever pot you're using to boil these jars, if you put a lid on it that doesn't seal, so if it's canning lid, then you don't click it into place. That's going to help limit the evaporation as well. Less splashing, less evaporation, your water's not going to drop as much. So it's always good to do that, and it keeps the heat in better as well. But you can top up the water with boiling water if need be during the process. So since I had to watch it and everything else, I decided to get some use out of the last of the lemons. So I bought a box of lemons last shopping trip. They've lasted quite well. We've juiced a lot of them. We've frozen the juice in ice cube trays, we made lemon curd, we made lemon cakes, we've done all sorts of things with them. But we still had a few left that I just hadn't got to, because then we got the hamper, so then we'd had the plums and everything else. So I got Surreal to finish juicing them for me, which she did with very minimal whinging, which was lovely. And I decided to make some lemon ginger cordial out of it. So as in the previous video, the cordials are very similar. You make a juice or a tea or whatever, and then you measure the juice with the fruits. I do it in the steam juicer when I'm doing things that actual fruit, like, you know, the plums and things like that. But with something like lemon ginger, you're using water and you need to steep it. So the ginger and the lemon juice is added to water. You can add the sugar before steeping or after. That's a little bit, there's multiple ways of doing that. Citric acid and everything, and you simmer it until the sugar is dissolved, and then put the lid on it and steep it overnight generally. So I put the ginger in there. Now I'm using dried ginger here because I couldn't find the fresh ginger. I have found it since then. There's 2 big bags of it in the back of the freezer, but I couldn't find it. So I used dried ginger, but I used half the weight of it than I would have the fresh ginger. And I do prefer the fresh ginger. The dried ginger does leave a slight aftertaste to it, and it's got a bit more heat to it, whereas the fresh ginger tends to be a little bit sweeter. But anyway, I used the lemon juice, the dried ginger, citric acid, sugar, put it in the pot, simmered it till all the sugar was dissolved, and then put the lid on it and put it aside to steep overnight. This is what the banana bread looked like once it was cooked and sliced, perfectly cooked all the way through, nice big slices. Always nicer with some chocolate chips in it, but as I said, we did it just plain for this time. This is the white sandwich bread. It's still not quite what I'm after, but it made good toast for eggs on toast and stuff, and the kids ate it regardless. So I don't know what I worry about with trying breads. They're pretty happy to eat just about anything. Then, okay, so the next day I strained the ginger lemon tea, I suppose it is, through a cloth. I didn't film it, so I used the same bag that I used to strain the cheese and things like that. It's a cotton linen bag with a drawstring. I think I'll buy some more fabric to make some of my own, just because it'd be cheaper in the end to have some linen cotton and just overlock them into bags and put a drawstring on them. It'll work quite well. Something simple, and it's super handy to have more than one. Also, if you're doing things with some fruits, sometimes the fruits can die. If you're using natural fabric, like you're using cotton linen type blends, and then you're straining things like plums, you're going to stain the fabric, and that's fine. But then if you did something like straining a cheese a really highly acidic way through something that was purple from fruits, you're probably going to tint what you're straining, because that acid is going to clean the bags. You could soak them in vinegar. The more you soak them in vinegar, the more you're using an acid on it that can break the fibers down, things like that. So realistically, if you're using it for fruit, you just reuse it for fruit and not worry about the color, but then having one that you use for things like cheese, and that's probably preferable. Anyway, that's just a side note there. So I strained the ginger lemon tea, got as much liquid out as I could. I did feed the ginger to the chickens, actually. So the ginger has sugar in it, which is not ideal now that it's been sort of sugared, but ginger is quite good for chickens' digestion and things like that. It's good for them to have a little bit. So because we have so many chickens at the moment, putting a handful in each pen sort of used up the ginger, which worked well. I filled the passata bottles, same as process as most standard cordials. Cleaned the rims, lids on, and processed in the pressure canner as a steam canner. So I don't think I said, I would have to look at my notes as to how much sugar I used in these. It's a lot higher than, say, the plum apple, because lemon ginger is quite spicy and tart. So you do need a fair bit more sugar in it to allow for that lemon ginger flavor to come through without being too hard to tolerate. So the lemon ginger is higher in sugar than, say, the plum apple and things like that, but we do it to taste, basically. The lowest possible ratio of sugar that is still drinkable and enjoyable is what we go for, and then we can train ourselves to have less and less sugar in the end, is the theory. So the less sugar we use, the less we seem to require for things to taste good. a bit like coffee. We both used to drink our coffee with a fair bit of sugar, and then we went through Whole30 for 90 days, and while we were doing Whole30, you're not allowed to have any sugar, you're not allowed to have any dairy. So we started drinking our coffee with coconut cream and no sugar, and now that's how we drink it. We don't drink it sweetened, and we use coconut cream because Darryl still stays off dairy, and it's just easy for me to stay off it as well when he is, and we got used to not having any sugar, so you know, it's beneficial to have done that, I suppose. So anyway, I just got sidetracked again, didn't I? So we now have multiple flavors of cordial on the shelf, which is great. We have the lemon ginger, plum apple, we've still got some pineapple left. We might even have some strawberry left on the shelf as well. So it means that we can rotate the jars and have a couple open and try different flavors whenever we feel like it, and the kids have it as well. So that's great. This is what the banana bread in the jar ended up like. As you can see, the jars were a bit full. It definitely was a little bit too much batter. The bottom of the bread hasn't pulled away from the sides like the top half of the bread is. So the way that it's pulled away at the top is how you want the whole jar to pull away. It's also slightly hitting the lid of the jar, which isn't what you want either. You want it to dome up, but you want it to dome up at the top of the jar without hitting the lid. So these were definitely a little too full for whether it's the batter, whether it's the recipe that I chose, or I don't know, whatever it is, they're definitely a little bit too full. It is cooked, so when you look at the inside of it, it's definitely still cooked, which is great, but it's a little wet. Now, the problem with banana bread and things like that in these jars is that if it's not fully cooked, you have the risk of fermentation. So it will ferment in the jar and then it'll blow its lid. And so you want it perfectly cooked. So these are fine. They're edible. We're going to eat them fairly quickly. They're not going to sit on the shelf, but they were never going to sit on the shelf for very long anyway. It's cake, and we're a family of 8. It's never going to last very long. It was just a way to use those bananas up, get them on the shelf, used before they went rotten, and when we were out of freezer space. So it was kind of hard. They're very hard to get out of the jar. They do not slide out very easily. You end up having to scoop them out because they're so wet around that bottom of it. But they are cooked all the way through. They're really tasty, really moist, very nice. So happy with it. Need less batter in the jar, but that's fine. So if these are processed appropriately, cooked all the way through, and they have all the steps that you want, they don't hit the lid and they're pulling away all the way down from the jar, these can last 6 to 12 months on your shelf. Because it hasn't lasted that long, because it hasn't gone quite right, we'll eat them within probably the next 4 or 6 weeks, and that's fine. The double batch of batter that I did fills that one large loaf tin was sort of 3 and a bit jars. So it's not like eating a whole jar of these every couple of days is going to be a drama for us. It's not a whole lot of cake in the scheme of the quantity that a family of 8 can eat. So we will get through these and that will be fine. So that was nice though. Added those jars of banana bread to the shelf for the next few weeks. Got the lemon ginger cordial, and to add to the other cordials, and that it was just good. So, and then we got banana bread to eat for the next couple of days before we use the canned stuff. Plenty of bananas in the freezer. It was a good buy. As I said, I try normally not to purchase things like that in the middle of the month because it's spending money that we wouldn't otherwise spend, but $15 boxes of bananas was a little bit too hard to pass up because we're coming way out of banana season now, which means that every time I go shopping from this point forward, they'll probably be quite expensive, like $3-4 a kilo. I still quite often buy a box because the kids will eat them in the first week or two as breakfast snacks and things like that, but it's expensive, so I'm not going to be buying larger quantities of them, and they won't make it to the freezer and things like that. So definitely worth grabbing something like a banana at this time of year when it's that cheap. So anyway, hope you enjoyed watching the video. Hope you enjoyed seeing the banana bread in the jar, and we get a little bit more idea about cordials. I know that cordial is not something that a lot of the other countries really do, but for us, we enjoy it very much. I drink a lot of water, but it's really nice to have something flavored with dinner, and something with bubbles with dinner is really nice. We don't drink alcohol or anything like that, so this is our treat to drink sort of thing. So gives maybe some people who've never had cordial before might like to give it a try now, and then you'll like it and want to make it all the time. So anyway, thank you for joining me again today, guys, and I will see you on the next video. See you later.